26 hours on a grounded plane in Poland. It sounds like the premise for a Netflix comedy, but it was, in fact, how a group of South African journalists spent their weekend. They were meant to accompany President Cyril Ramaphosa and other African leaders on their peace talks with Ukraine and Russia. Instead, they, along with over 120 security personnel and a lot of weapons, it seems, were impounded and kept on the tarmac in Warsaw. eNCA senior reporter Aviwe Mtila and senior cameraman Joe Komane were on that plane. They're both joining me in studio, safe and sound, back at home after a weekend on the tarmac, and I think eventually you were allowed in a hotel. Joe Komane, I'm going to start with you. You've done a lot of international travel. You're a very experienced cameraman. Have you ever experienced anything like this before?
Never before. You know, like after flying over 10 hours, you were expecting to get off as soon as you can. The next thing, like, we were there and say, like, okay, it was some mind games actually. Like, you were thinking of disembarking the
What
aircraft.
did they tell you? What was the first thing they said to you when you realized something was going wrong?
No, basically, when it landed, and then there was some kind of a meeting, like, in front of the aircraft. We didn't know what was going on initially. But now the word came that we can't disembark. So there were some talks, and then suddenly we realized that it's not going to happen. And then they also said, no, actually, we're going to sleep in this aircraft. Then, thinking that, okay, we're sleeping for one night, it's fine. The next day, same thing. And then at some point, they were saying, okay, preference will be given to the female reporters or journalists. And as they were preparing to go out, they say, no, you can't. Then another thing, we had to sleep again there.
So you slept for 3 nights on the plane? Or 2?
Could be, because now that includes flying there for over 10 hours.
Yeah.
And then plus the 26 hours that we were there on the ground. And, you know, you feel like, you know, we are in a confined space now. You need to leave this plane. And we were running out of food as well. But the SAA crew were, like, very professional in handling everything in terms of giving us rationales and all these things.
I mean, I hope you raided the minibar. Because what else is there to do when you're sitting on the tarmac?
There was nothing from the bar, so it was just water, juice, and some sandwiches.
I mean, we're laughing about it, but the reality is it's extremely frustrating. You're both very experienced journalists, and there was a story to tell, and it was a big one. Aviwe, what, after spending all that time on the plane, what have you come to understand as the reason for not being allowed off that plane and not being allowed to travel further? Because then there was talk of, okay, well, we might not be allowed into Ukraine, but maybe we can get into Russia, and none of that became a possibility. So what went wrong?
Sally, it's two sides to the coin. If you are to ask the South African delegation, as Joe suggests, that it's only around midnight where we got the true essence of what was going on, having landed at around 1:30 on the Thursday. So all this time, I think that's the most frustrating part of it all, is not knowing what's going on. There was dribs and drabs of communication, and then not being told the full extent, up until General Wale Rode, of course, heading the Presidential Protection Service, eventually decided to call journalists and say, come see for yourself what was happening. That's when we eventually were allowed to film ourselves, and he was very frustrated.
What did you see? So what did you see? What was going wrong?
So we go outside. All of us rush, obviously, to hear what's going to happen. We go outside. General Wale Rode is very upset. He has some of the personnel of the Presidential Protection Service. He has members of the SAA crew. He has members of the embassy. They're up and down the stairs. Down on the ground, you can see the Polish police, and you can see it's tense engagement, Sally, on what's going on. And just on their left, well, our left, there is cargo that you can see is the cargo that essentially is our cargo from the SAA chartered Airbus. The bone of contention is whether this cargo is to be allowed inside, because we do understand it's carrying the weapons of the 120 or so personnel of the Presidential Protection Service. The issue is their permits. Do they have the correct authorization? General Wale Rode is saying that at first they demanded original documentation, which they provided. They say that the South African embassy in Poland actually provided that documentation, yet still there was unwillingness to assist them. And they even say, in fact, there was a communication barrier at one point as they were giving them the original documentation of the weaponry that they have, where the Polish now are switching to speak their own home language, which of course is already a barrier in communication. A lot of incidents that happened there. There was a lady even who affirmed what General Wale Rhoda was saying in terms of her being stripped naked. She is from the SA embassy. She was stripped naked, strip searched naked in front of the Polish authorities, and she was there.
She was on the plane with you?
She's part of the SA embassy. She's one of the diplomats.
Okay, in Poland?
In Poland.
When
so
was she stripped naked?
In trying to assist, this is still, because all of this we're coming to know of just before midnight. That's when we were called from 1:30. So all of this is happening between
Thursday midnight. So you landed at lunchtime on Thursday. Okay.
Yes. So all of this is when we get the true extent, because just minutes before this actual incident, it's when the female journalists were given preference in terms of the hotel stay. So at this point, we're all still hopeful that, okay, we are eventually going to disembark. This is after being disgruntled, essentially, Sally. After seeing, you can clearly see something's not wrong yet. Around 5 o'clock, we're all wanting to even write stories as to why there is at least 120 Presidential Protection Services personnel on the ground. Who is protecting the president? Why are these people sitting on the ground? Why is there no explanation?
So what answers did you get?
All we got from Vincent at that time was that they're trying to sort of resolve the issue. They didn't give us the full extent up until there was that sort of impromptu media briefing by General Wale Rhoda, him very infuriated, calling it, racism, blunt racism.
But the other African leaders got through and other planes carrying Africans got through, right?
That's supposedly the case, because we had very minimal communication. Remember, Sally, we're inside this flight. We left here nearly towards midnight on Wednesday. We have a lack of communication throughout, up until at least 3:30. On the Friday, when we were eventually...
Friday afternoon?
Friday afternoon, because we landed there at around 1:30, so it's at least 26 hours later.
So here's a couple of things that I think all of us just don't understand. Why on earth did the president need 120 security personnel? Did you ever come to understand why? Joe or Aviwe, either of you?
No, actually, because the information was not even coming straight forth. So, by the look of things, there were a whole lot of security guys, of which we don't know how did they assess the dangers that side also, but I think they had like a whole lot of weaponry as well.
And they weren't ultimately able to do their job. My understanding from our producer is that our president did have his direct security detail with him, but this larger group obviously never got to do their job. Talk to me about the weapons on the plane. There have been reports, Aviwe, that some of them were definitely nothing to do with guarding a president or guarding a detail that is on a peace talk mission. What do you know about that, if anything?
I guess that's what the Polish delegation wanted, because they themselves said that this has nothing to do with racism or any of the allegations that were made that night by General Wale Rhoda. In fact, all they wanted was to know what was in there. They're saying that the weapons themselves were there illegally. So they wanted documentation, papers to prove what was inside there. I remember at one point, I think they were asked to open up at least. They say that they didn't confiscate the weapons. None of the weapons were confiscated. But we do understand some of the personnel, these 120 or so personnel comprised both of the South African Police Service as well as the South African National Defence Force, who some of them then stayed behind and guarded the South African chartered Airbus themselves, and up until we left then on Sunday. So we're not sure what kind of weaponry was in there, essentially. And it wasn't opened up at all. And up until they departed. Those were some of the issues. For example, we had even glimmers of hope on Friday, where the SAA captain suggested that at around 11:30...
Yeah, you actually spoke to... I think we're going to play that clip. I don't think the sound is there, but we've got a clip of you actually saying to the captain, hey, what's going on? What did he tell you? And surely I would imagine that as a group of feisty journalists, you would have at one stage said, well, let us get off and travel on to Ukraine because we've got all our paperwork. Why were you, as a group of journalists, why did you not do that? Or were you not allowed?
We were not allowed. That's what we were trying to understand, because our papers are in order. We've got our visas that we went through the Polish embassy. Everything was in order from our side. We were wondering, why aren't we being let off this jet? But it never was forthcoming. Even the captain himself, who I must commend, the SAA team, as much as they get criticized time and again, Sally, they were very helpful in that particular flight. Even the SAA captain suggesting that that he's never seen such. It's like he was a very jovial fella, very, happy even under the circumstances, trying to keep our spirits alive, even playing music, suggesting that we can make requests.
It's bizarre. What you're telling me is that you've got all your paperwork. At least let the journalists and the camera people off to go and tell the story. Instead, you spend, 2 nights sleeping, on the seats?
Yeah.
Using the toilets, which I imagine would have got increasingly vile?
Yes, because at some point they came and cleaned up the aircraft while we were still there, and of which it was like a health hazard in any way, because you can't be there for so many hours. They need to do some things. I don't know what normally they do, like in terms of cleaning the toilets and stuff like that. But I think in terms of not letting anyone out, they were thinking maybe we are all part of the security thing, because even our cameras, they were at I don't know what they call it, where they store everything under the plane.
Right.
So basically, we went with our equipment there, and then it came back into South Africa without even using it. So we were relying on the cell phones and then some makeshift methods of doing things.
So our luggage, you had to buy new clothes there, because we never used any of the clothes that were prepared or
because you eventually did get to the hotel, didn't you? Was it for one night?
We got to the hotel for 2 nights.
Yes, they did allow us to go there, and then we were there for 2 nights. But now the problem was that we didn't have any of our things, like
so all the luggage was kept on the plane under lockdown?
Yes, so we had to buy some new stuff when we get there, and then
So it was a case of mission unaccomplished. Aviwe, you said there's 2 sides to the story, it's not clear yet, but looking back on it now, what do you think was going on? What is your sense of why this happened? I mean, a lot of people are saying, typical South Africa, not filling up.
They have the original documentation provided by the South African embassy, yet still all of this didn't happen. There was the female embassy lady that was essentially strip searched, even going there, Sally. Upon arriving in the Mediterranean Sea, we had to at least circle for some time, because we weren't allowed through the Italian airspace, something that they swear that has never been an issue in all their travels going abroad before. I heard on the breakfast table as well, Sally, that the flight that we were on, heading to Poland, it was the most, in the top 5 most guarded flights around the world at that time. That's already raising a number of eyebrows. But when it comes to, as I mentioned, the Polish side of things, they also vow that they were just merely doing what they had to do. But you see that even maybe geopolitics are at play here, given Poland, it's no secret. They don't have a liking for Russia. They're more closer to the US. They're just a lot that needs to be
unearthed. There's so many unanswered questions around that Lady R ship, what it was doing in December, even though, of course, our government says they put nothing on that ship. There is an investigation underway. We've invited the Russian president to the BRICS summit here in August. So there are those concerns, and perhaps South Africa is being seen as increasingly a risk. All I can say is, I'm sorry you had to spend so long on an aeroplane, 3 days of aeroplane food. I'm glad you're home safe. And as we heard from the Ukrainian ambassador, she's hoping there are more visits from the African delegation. Maybe next time they'll let you in. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming in to chat to us.